Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exercise is Bullshit. I'm your host, Logan Emmett Herlihy, and I'm so excited to be joined today by the one, the only, Jay Vincent. Jay joins us today from sunny Florida. Are you in Tampa, Jay?
Tampa. Yep.
Yeah. So he's living the dream down there with Ron DeSantis. No rules, just shooting from the hip, literally and
hmm
metaphorically. Jay, I'd love you to just for our audience members that don't know who you are, why don't you give us a little bit of your background, who you are, kind of what you do, how you got into high intensity training and just exercise in general, and then anything else you wanna
hmm
sprinkle in there about your background as well would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So, my background is similar yet different in many ways to most people kind of come across, I guess, this approach to training. Um, so I was about 24, 25 years old, about 24 years old. And I had decided, I'm working the typical office job. I had a college degree in business economics with a minor in biology. Something I thought I was supposed to do was get a normal job, work your way up the ladder, and hate your life. And biology because I had a knack for understanding, being interested in science. So kind of a weird breakdown of degrees. And then I get my typical office job. 10 months into it, say to myself, "This can't be it. This is not how my life is supposed to go." It was awful. So I decided, maybe I'm going
What
to
were
take a
you
stab
What
at
were you
fitness
doing?
modeling. I was an insurance underwriter.
Oh,
A
Jesus,
commercial
yeah.
insurance underwriter.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I was working in the cubicle. I'm like, all right, this is what I was supposed to do. Get a steady job with benefits.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I can't imagine
Yeah,
doing this
just
for the
pulling
rest of
your
my
hair
life.
out. Yeah, got it.
It was
Okay,
awful.
sorry.
It was awful. And so, I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, maybe for some reason fitness modeling could get me out of this. I had always been complimented on my physique. I remember in college people would say, "You look like a mannequin." And I'm like, huh, maybe I could be a human mannequin. So I started, I was about 191, 92 pounds at the time. I get into a modeling agency, and the agent says, "You look great. You got everything, but you need to put on more size. You need to be over 200 pounds. That's what they're looking for." And I had been training since I was 16 years old. And I was about 24 at the time. And I thought to myself, how the heck am I going to put on muscle? This is the best I could do. I thought I was jacked. So I start exploring, I start reading, I come across the high intensity training approach, Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and then the light bulb went on.
Was your
I'm like,
first exposure Body by Science? Is that the first book you
my
read kind
first
of in that space?
exposure was a presentation, a seminar from 2009 of Dr. Doug McGuff
I know the one you're
explaining
talking about.
exercise.
Yeah, on YouTube.
Yep. And here I am
Yep,
at
that's great.
my desk job watching this, and I went, oh, wow, that makes way too much sense. So that completely changed my perspective on exercise. So from there, I just went down the rabbit hole. I read every single thing I could get my hands on, and I'm surrounded by every high intensity training book. Wayne Westcott, Ellington Darden, Matt Brzezicki. I got them all, and I went crazy. Started applying these principles to my training, and within about 4 months, I put on about 10 to 15 pounds. I think it went from 192 to like 204, 205. And right from there, my agent got me bookings. I booked, some, as you can see, some ads with Under Armour, Muscle Tech. I was a Muscle Tech sponsored athlete, Men's Health. I got so many bookings, my agent couldn't believe it. And people started asking me, "What did you do?" And I said, "Well, I started teaching people." "Well, you have it all wrong, actually. You know, you don't want to train more frequently. You don't want to train longer. You don't want to train more. You want to train harder." So here I was working my office job, training about 6 days a week, go to work, go to the gym, go home, repeat. And I thought I had sleep apnea because I was so incredibly exhausted every day. Turns out I was overtrained. I was ridiculously overtrained. So I cut my workouts in half. And not only did I feel better, I put on mass very quickly. And back to, people asking me what I was doing, I started to show them and teach them. And it turned into a career teaching high intensity training to people. I opened my first studio, and then I bought somebody who I started doing high intensity training with, I bought their studio from them later down the road. I ended up with two studios in New York. And then, COVID happened. I got away from the studios, and here I am teaching it online.
So what is that? It's so funny how similar that story is. Now, maybe not everyone was 191 pounds and about to be an Under Armour model, but that story with high intensity training is, pretty standard across the industry. I was training way too much. I'd sort of plateaued with how much muscle I could gain. All of a sudden, I stopped working out as much and then magically put on more mass. I mean, I've heard that story so many times. What do you do now? How do you spread the word? You mentioned working online. What does that program look like? Obviously, you've amassed a pretty large following. I've been following you for the last few years since you were in New York through COVID. And in your Instagram, all that stuff has grown pretty drastically. And I think your YouTube's got a pretty good following. What are you doing? What kind of information are you helping get out there to sort of stop this exercise bullshit, if you will?
Well, my mission is quite simple. My mission is, we know the ridiculous improvements in health that we can make from exercise. Yet there are a lot of people who don't do it, despite having access to gyms within a stone's throw away, no matter where they live, despite gyms being $2.50 a week, and despite, whether they'd like to admit it or not, despite having the time to do it, we still have a lot of people who do not exercise. And the reason is the fitness industry had created some sort of valor around your fitness journey, and people have gotten the impression that you can't just work out, you have to live for your training. You have to live in the gym. You have to go on this, rampage of diet and supplements and training 2 hours a day. And for the average individual who's not interested in that, it's very off-putting. So despite the evidence that exercise is extremely good for you, we have a lot of people who don't do it because they feel it's too much of a time commitment. It's too much of an investment, so they're not doing it all. So my mission is to prove that you can still get all of the positive effects of exercise without sacrificing more important things: time with your family, your job, your sleep, your health, recreation. And I believe if this message gets out, we will have a lot more healthy people. We'll have a lot more people yielding the potential benefits of exercise. And along the way, if you do it correctly, we'll have less injuries. So that is really my mission, is to get the people who could be seeing the benefits of exercise to exercise in order to spread this extreme life hack to the people who are not using it.
Yeah,
So
I love the
that's it
way
in a
you
nutshell.
Yeah, I love the way you articulated that, and I'm never not still amazed at how little people understand about exercise, even though there's so much information out there. And I think it really is that. It's just information overload. And there's so many charlatans that make it seem like you have to be that person that's living in the gym. If you want to be like me, you have to wake up at 4 a.m. and sun your butthole and, hop in a ice bath and like hustle grind mindset and all that stuff. And as we know, and we'll discuss in a little more detail here too, like obviously the benefits of even a short, if you want to call it minimum effective dose style of training, like I always think about it in what I call sufficiency versus optimization, right? So if you want to optimize, if you want to be, the next Mr. Olympia, yeah, there's some sacrifices you're going to have to make. There's some things you're going to have to do. There's some diet choices you're going to have to make. You might not be able to spend all that free time with your family. If you just want to feel and look better, holy shit, can you get a lot of benefits doing not very much as long as you're doing it intensely? And to me, excuse me, but getting that 95% of the benefit in 10% of the time, I think people just think it's too good to be true. And then they try this style of training and all of a sudden it's like, Oh my God. I mean, that was my experience the first time I ever did a super slow workout for the first time. I worked in a like a true Ken Hutchins style super slow facility, climate controlled, fans everywhere, all that stuff. And I did like 4 exercises and I was on the floor for about 3 times longer on the floor than I was actually working out afterwards. And it's like, holy crap, I've just wasted so much time and so much of my life, doing things the way that I thought I had to do them because that's what the biggest, juice head in the gym said. Just with that idea of change I think one of the important things for me with this podcast is really understanding the transition that people make as they start to branch into that evidence-based space. What is something that you've really changed your mind on in the last 3 to 5 years? And obviously, you made that huge transition from 6 days a week to high intensity style training. But something recently, maybe it's volume, maybe it's exercise speed. What is something that you've really made a shift on in the last few years that you think is important to share with people?
I think both repetition cadence and multiple sets. Because I'm noticing, I was once the guy that if you do an additional set, I'm gonna yell at you. Like, you're crazy, you're this, you're that. But that was when I was supervising these workouts. So then I started to notice not everybody actually has who's doing this on their own. Not everybody can or always will recruit the necessary or optimum number of motor units in one set, thereby providing use for additional sets. So this is my perspective on this. We obviously want to do everything as efficiently as possible. I don't take the long way to the grocery store for a reason. Why would I do that? That makes no sense. I don't take the scenic route. We want to stimulate the correct, we want to produce the correct stimulus in as minimal sets necessary. But that does not always mean we do. And it especially does not always mean people who are not intensely interested in high intensity training or training in general, people who have not taught this, people who are not, kind of like nerds in this field like we are. I don't think they're going to produce that stimulus, especially in the beginning, with just one set. So, in my coaching program, it takes me 4 to 8 weeks to even teach them how to train relatively intensely. And I notice as I coach people online, as time goes on, they start to learn how to push their bodies. I teach them how to push a little further, a little further, a little further, to the point where most of the time in the beginning, I've got them doing 2 sets, never 3 really. And then, my approach is eventually you're going to get to the point where you say to yourself, there's absolutely no way I can do a second. And when you have that revelation, don't do a second. Okay. So that's kind of the approach. The fact of the matter is, yes, it's true. Additional sets absolutely do not provide additional improvements in muscle strength and size. But that is in a relatively controlled environment. That's considering these individuals are training under our instruction or training properly, which they're generally not, obviously, in the beginning. So my whole thing is, I don't give a damn how many sets you do. I don't care. Enough with the 1 set, 2 set, 3 set, 9 set debate. I don't care. It's boring. It's annoying. It's dead. Shut up. Do as few sets as you can possibly do to generate that stimulus. If it's 2, I don't give a shit. If it's 1, bravo. That's great. So that's one thing I changed my mind on. I just don't give a shit how many sets people do anymore. I really don't care. Obviously,
Yeah,
make it efficient.
I think that's such an important point, and that's something that I've really transitioned a lot on as well. Because obviously, my first exposure was to a super slow facility, which is 1 set, keep it under 2 minutes, super strict time frame, everything like that.
Yeah,
And I was very dogmatic about that for a long time.
me too.
And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head with as practitioners, we've seen how poor people are at actually judging what failure looks like and their expectations of what hard work is when they first come in compared to what you and I would consider, like if you were training me or I was training you, compared to somebody who's never been into the gym before, like that's might as well be two totally different activities, right? So to be able to teach somebody and guide them, and that's something I've made big transitions on myself as well in my own personal training, because obviously I'm working for myself now, so I don't have a training partner. So even somebody who's been doing this for 7 years that understands what hard work is supposed to look like, I've still added in a little more volume in my own training just because I know if somebody's not there yelling at me or giving me some assisted reps, like it's just not going to be the same stimulus that it would be otherwise, right? If you were there and encouraging me, or, I saw you got your Dorian Yates certification. Like I can't imagine how hard I would work if freaking Dorian Yates is there yelling at me, right? But it's not as hard as I push myself, right? So just I think understanding that, and still, like you said, being efficient. I never do more than 2 sets of anything, but I have noticed a huge difference from training on my own of just trying a single set and really trying to eke it all out, whereas really having to do drop sets and doing a lot of rest pauses to let's just change it to take a little rest time in between, do 2 sets, really eke it out on that last one. And it's made a huge difference for me personally. What was the other thing you mentioned? I think maybe rep speed.
Yeah, the other thing was rep speed. You know, I've fallen away from the super slow thing. If you know, again, my mission is really to teach these principles to people who are not exercising so they can use them and finally start exercising. Okay. The problem with super slow is it does not resonate well with the current fitness industry. They fucking hate it. They hate it. Okay. So when it comes to rep cadence, basically I like this. Don't go any faster than 3 seconds in each direction. Don't go any slower than 10. I don't care as long as it falls into there. But I used to be the dogmatic 10 seconds up, 10 seconds down. And I noticed when I started to teach people remotely, they started focusing on the rep cadence as it's the most important factor of their exercise. And you know what they would do? They wouldn't even get close to failure because they'd be way too afraid to move quickly. So they'd be going slow. And I noticed this with everybody, not everybody, but most people who try to do a really slow cadence, they'll start to get approach failure and they'll just, and I'm like, what the fuck was that? That's not failure. So that started to drive me crazy. So I started to pull away. I said, just control the weight. Between 3 and 10 seconds each direction, whatever feels best for you, do that. Change direction slowly, whatever. And since then, I've gotten people to train harder. So I kind of pulled back from super slow a little bit. One, because I think the vast majority of people don't really have the motor control to do it correctly. Number 2, it bores the shit out of people, and it's very hard for people to watch. And number 3, people tend to, without instruction, not train as hard with it. So, with an experienced practitioner or instructor, there are a lot of exercises I personally do very slow rep cadences on, but I don't necessarily recommend that across the board because I've seen huge differences in people's motor control, also the equipment they're using. If you use a junky piece of equipment and you try to do super slow, it's just going to stick all the way through. And that's what most people are using. So a lot of these principles, they apply to the super slow studio. They apply to just, well lubricated, really nice Nautilus and MedX machines and hammer strength machines. But for the average person who's trying to take these principles and use them in the gym, I'm finding there's a lot more gray area when it comes to these. So the rep cadence thing, I changed my mind on rep cadence. As long as it's slow enough to where you're controlling the weight, I don't care what it is.
Yeah, I actually had a colleague. He's my coach as well, on the podcast just last week, and we had an entire conversation just about that, about tempo, and how he was a little quicker to the draw for that than I was, but just everything you just said, right? Letting people express their own speed normally in a safe fashion, right? Obviously, we don't want to see crazy explosive movements and people using momentum, but I think, you can't, in my estimation, you can't really call yourself an evidence-based practitioner and be a stern, diehard advocate of super slow, because the evidence just doesn't support slow speed of movement. Now, I think you could make a good argument about the importance of slower speeds, right? From a safety perspective, like there's a lot of conjecture in there to be had, and like subjective, hey, this is better for older individuals. But like the reality is, if you know anything about the history of super slow too, it was developed for osteopenic women, right? Like 70, 80-year-old women. So it's probably not the best thing for somebody who's maybe, your type of audience, who tends to be, I believe you said, like skinny guys trying to put on some mass. That was not our target audience in the super slow facility I was at. And, I know that studio owner still. I talked to him the other day. They're still very successful, but their target audience is not people who are, Gen Z, right? They're 60 and above. And it's people who don't really care about exercise, in the sense of they know that they have to do it, but they could give a shit about how cool they look, how much muscle they have. They just know it's good for them. And they'd rather just do this simple thing, go in, do a big five, get it over with in 20 minutes or less, and get out the door, as opposed to, I like going to the gym. And that's something I've sort of refound for myself too. Like the reason I got into fitness was because I liked going to the gym. And I think that's something that I've struggled with over the last few years, is like, well, do I only have to work out twice a week? Do I only have to, do one set of every single thing? Or is there maybe something to like actually going to the gym and enjoying being there and enjoying the culture and all of that stuff as well? So, well, I'd love to go ahead. Did you have something to add there?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. We're dealing with kind of different demographics than super slow. In my studios on my MedX equipment, the older individuals, super slow all the way. Although I did have some whose motor control was so bad they could not move slowly at all. And people like this exist. They're called motor morons. We know this. But older people, great. But I found myself not really pushing a very, very slow cadence on younger people. It's kind of, it's, if it doesn't make a difference, then why are we being dogmatic towards it? I mean, it comes down to this. You want to get to a point in an exercise where you are contracting your muscles, the target muscle group, with a high amount of effort. That's literally all that matters. Like, that's how motor units are recruited. We obviously want to choose the most efficient, safe, and pretty much the most efficient and safe way of doing this. It's all equally effective, whether you use a barbell, a MedX machine. I hate saying this, but a resistance band, I hate resistance bands. They're ridiculous, but resistance is resistance. So I found that, with the people who just don't care, they want to get in, they want you to give them the results, and then they want to go about their lives. When you start talking about this to exercise enthusiasts, they want to split every damn hair with you, because generally they've been doing a certain thing for a long time. They do not like to be wrong. They have confirmation bias. And it's just, when you're going back and forth with exercise enthusiasts and arguing about rep speed, you might as well just scream at your wall. It's not going to go anywhere. And that's what I've noticed about a lot of, and I used to be like this too, high intensity training practitioners are very arrogant and very stubborn. And I've noticed, if I want to spread these principles, to a lot of people, you've got to be a little more flexible. I'm not going to be stubborn, dogmatic, whatever. It's basically like, push hard, don't do it too often or too much, don't hurt yourself in the process. Like that's it. It's quite simple when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think there's so many other things that we could really, pick out that are so wrong in our industry that are worth focusing on, as opposed to like, is somebody going in a 2-2 cadence and you think that's too fast, but they're getting results? Like, is that really
Mm-hmm.
the end of the world? As opposed to like, as we'll talk about a little bit, like sport specific stuff. And you've been on a tear the last few days, I've seen, with some
Oh
idiotic
yeah.
PTs posting, Bosu balls, balancing, battle ropes, all kinds of dumb shit. And it's like, there's so many other things that people are misinformed about, that I think if we can teach people to work hard, brief, and infrequent, to quote Arthur Jones, a little bit, regardless of if you're following the Nautilus principles exactly to the T, which, by the way, Arthur also started training people 4 days a week when he started, and then went down to 3, and then went down to. So it's like it's okay to change your mind and learn new things and adjust over the course of your career. So I'd love to chat with you about some, these are some big picture fitness myths and BS in the fitness industry. And I just really appreciate your perspective and your anecdote to help your audience kind of sift through the bullshit. So I picked out a few big ideas, but feel free to just go on any tangent that you'd like or any other things you think are
Oh, you'll
important.
get one. Don't worry.
Yeah. So the first one here, I think, is a big one, and we've touched on it a little bit. It's just volume, right? I think when most of us start out, especially if we started reading muscle magazines, or, there was probably a few kids out there who saw your Under Armour articles that were like, I got to be like Jay Vincent, and I bet he works out 3 hours a day. But that's what I always heard, right? When I followed muscle and fitness and all those things, or I'd ask the biggest guy in the gym when I was 14, 15 years old going in, it was 3 hours a day. Bro splits, you've got to do 20 plus sets per muscle group. So based on your experience, based on anecdote, based on the research, how much volume is actually enough? And how does someone find the appropriate volume for themselves? And go.
Yeah, so the amount of volume that's enough is obviously going to depend on the individual, and is going to depend on a variety of factors, namely, how hard is the person training? So, yeah, when we talk about the volume discussion, a lot of people who go to the gym who aren't high intensity training proponents, their sets are far less stressful and intense compared to our sets, where we literally focus on intensity and stress. We go into the gym with a completely different objective than the vast majority of the fitness industry. The vast majority of the fitness industry goes into the gym with a menu of exercises that they must complete. It's like a checklist. And they are under the impression that the stimulus lies in their ability to complete this list of exercises. We, on the other hand, know that that is not true. We go into the gym with a very different goal. We go into the gym with the focus of addressing all the major muscle groups and stressing them with high amounts of effort, because high amounts of effort result in high amounts of motor unit recruitment and high amounts of muscle fiber stimulation through that motor unit recruitment. So when we try to compare, volumes, we need to look at how the individual actually does a set. Because most of the times we are not talking about the same thing. When somebody says, one set to failure, that can't possibly work, the response is simple. Well, no, not the way you do it. So when it comes to volume, it's going to depend on how hard the individual is training. Their tolerance for the stress associated with exercise, their recovery ability. But it seems that 1 to 2 workouts per week with at least one set to muscle failure per major muscle group is quite a good stimulus for the vast majority of people to see probably 80 to 90% of their potential muscle growth. And I would say, even if they are training to volitional failure, to the point where they think they've failed, but not quite, I still think they're going to get the vast majority of their gains attempting failure with 1 to 2 workouts a week. But the thing is, we know that there is a huge point of diminishing returns when it comes to adding volume. Because here's the thing. What is volume? Volume is the weight moving up and down, according to the definition of most people. But the correct definition of volume is time under meaningful load, not time under load. I could hold this remote, and I'm getting all kinds of time under load, but this is not exercise volume. This is nothing. Time under meaningful load. But we need to remember something as well. Volume is not sets and reps, lifting and lowering the weight, because a muscle's job is not to produce movement. A muscle's job is to produce force. If the muscle produces more force than the load it is working against, you have concentric movement. If the muscle produces less force than the load it is contracting against, you have eccentric movement. Muscles can permit movement, but they cannot produce it. So when you understand that concept alone, it's evident that it does not matter how many times the weight goes up and down. And like Ken Hutchins likes to say, the weight simply comes along for the ride. And when you explain that to people, they start to understand. They go, oh, I'll grab my dumbbell and I'll hold it out, a 15-pound dumbbell, and I'll say, are my muscles working? Yes. Am I doing any sort of volume? No. So therefore, volume is not the stimulus for muscle growth, right? So what is the stimulus for muscle growth? It's mechanical tension or mechanotransduction. Basically, what we are doing is we are turning on mechanosensors on the outside of your muscle cells, which in turn stimulate a downstream of biochemical responses that turn on the mammalian target of rapamycin, the mTOR pathway. The mTOR pathway tells the muscle to build new contractile proteins. Okay, that's the goal. So we want to turn on these mechanosensors in as many muscle fibers as possible. Well, how do we do that? Well, according to Dr. Elwood Henneman from 1957, coined something called the Henneman size principle. They found it way back in 1938 with Denny Brown and Pennybacher, that motor units are excited, aka turned on, based on intensity of effort. So if a motor unit is packed with a bunch of muscle fibers, and keep in mind, people who are listening, you cannot contract an individual muscle fiber in a motor unit. You can contract an entire motor unit, thereby all the fibers inside of it. If we want to produce this mechanotransduction in as many muscle fibers as possible, we have to contract as many motor units as possible. So what did Dr. Elwood Henneman say? Intensity of effort excites the most amount of motor units, thereby the most muscle fibers. So that physiologically is the driver of muscle growth. Contracting as hard as you can. Whether or not the weight goes up and down makes no difference when it comes to mechanotransduction. Now, the bodybuilders used to believe that metabolic stress and muscle damage were contributors to muscle growth, which would make sense. The more the weight goes up and down, the more actin and myosin cross-bridging, the more microtrauma, the more muscle damage. The weight goes up and down, more and more muscle growth. Also, more sets, more reps, more metabolic byproducts, more metabolic stress, more muscle growth. But a paper published in 2022 by Dr. Stu Phillips and a bunch of other exercise scientists found that metabolic stress and muscle damage do not contribute to muscle growth. So now we're left with one thing: mechanical tension, mechanotransduction, and the way we stimulate that in the most muscle fibers as possible is exactly what I explained previously. So volume just doesn't make any sense. The goal is try to take an exercise or a set to the point where you are contracting really hard. And however many sets it takes you to get to that point is however many sets it takes you. And to worry about, should I do 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to muscle growth, well, now that you understand the physiology, it makes perfect sense that it really doesn't matter. So that's the general prescription I have people on is 1 to 2 sets to muscle failure or volitional failure or perceived failure, whatever the hell they think that is. Basic multi-joint, high bang for the buck exercises 1 to 2 times per week. And just by basically prescribing this to people, generally, they see far better results, far faster than anything they've ever tried. I had one client, he did this program for, I think he said 4 months, and he lost muscle along with losing fat. And he was training 5 days a week. He got done with that program. He went from about 175 pounds to 238 pounds, put it all back on because why? That's unsustainable. 5 days a week, it wore him to the ground. He got on my program. He lost 8 pounds of fat in 1 month, and he gained 2.5 pounds of muscle in 1 month in a calorie
Jeez,
deficit.
that's crazy.
8 workouts, more like 6 workouts. So he gained more muscle and lost more fat in 4 workouts. So if people are under the impression that brief, intense training can't be effective, well, I got a whole folder of DEXA scans to prove it. It is. So that's my
Yeah.
take on volume.
No, I think that's great, and the way I always learned it, and I still think of it this way, because obviously there's a huge debate in our industry around volume, and there's been a lot of research that's come out in the last few years saying, like, I'm sure you saw that recent paper that was like 52 sets of quad extensions. And I think it's, people are obsessed with how much can you handle as opposed to what is the actual threshold. That's how I always learned it with Ken Hutchins, is what is the threshold you have to cross to create the adaptation, right? Stimulus response, I think, is how Doug talks about it. And to me, that should really be the focus. And for some people, maybe that's 4 sets per muscle group. For other people, maybe it is 10 sets because the intensity, which we'll talk about next year, is so low that you do have to get more meaningful time under tension. So I think what I've really come to understand now from volume and just an intensity perspective that I try to tell people when I'm not, avoiding being dogmatic is I think everyone should understand and like intuitively experience what it means to actually go to like real muscle failure. Because if you're using any other system, if you're using reps in reserve, if you're looking at these papers that are talking about, if you're within 3 to 4 RIR, it's like, okay, well, if you've never actually gone to failure, then you don't know that 3 RIR still sucks ass. Like that's still freaking terrible if you've ever actually gone to muscle failure. And to think that like, oh, well, this feels kind of tough. I bet I'd fail in 3 reps. Like that chasm that we're talking about can be massive, right? And there was a study a few years back, I think it was Steele and some other colleagues that were looking at RIR specifically, and even trained individuals were their best guess was like 2 reps off from what failure actually was, and untrained was 4 plus. So it's like people are not good, even people who have experience at actually understanding what failure is. And you can't have the volume conversation in an educated way if you don't understand what intensity looks like. And I think that's a perfect segue into talking about what is intensity. How do you personally define intensity? And then how do you think about intensity for yourself and your clients? You kind of teased on this a little bit earlier about how you maybe teach some people to really learn how to push themselves a little further. Why don't you talk about how you think about intensity, what that word means to you, and then maybe how you define that for your clients and teach them how to push themselves a little bit further?
It's funny. This is what I usually start off with a lot of my new clients. I show them, if you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan. Have you seen that movie? There's
Yeah.
this scene where the German soldier is on the top floor of a house and they're having a fight, and the German soldier has a knife and he's on top of the American soldier trying to push the knife into his chest, and the American soldier is trying to block it so he doesn't die. When I tell people how hard they should push, I tell them, imagine you are that American soldier and you are trying to keep that knife from going into your chest. How hard would you be pushing to make sure that knife doesn't go into your chest? Push that hard. And that seems to help people resonate on what intensity should look like. And honestly, I play that stupid movie scene over in my head every single time I work out. Did I push that hard? Because that's essentially what we want to aim for. And I also tell people, training to failure should not be abrupt. This is something I learned from Drew Bay. It should be gradual. So if I see someone lifting and lowering slowly, and they get to the point where they do this, not failure. Failure should look like this. Say you're doing 10 repetitions, you're going to fail on the 11th. The 10th repetition will look like this. You're going to be pushed, and it's just inching along. And then you're going to attempt the other one, and you're going to contract, contract, contract. And then not only are you not able to contract upward, say we're doing an overhead press, you're contracting against the weight and it's coming down at you. That is failure. Failure is not when you can no longer complete the exercise in your predetermined repetition cadence. Failure is not when you approach a position in the exercise that is much more difficult than the rest of the exercise. Failure is where you can, we can talk about concentric failure, negative failure, whatever. But I found this works the best for most people training on their own. Obviously, once you become more advanced, doing this extra stuff can provide more muscle damage and more stress, thereby increase your recovery requirements with no additional muscle growth. So personally, I have to be very careful with doing stuff like that, or else I'll be on the couch for 3 days. But for beginners, I like them to interpret failure as not only can I not contract the weight upward at all, but it's starting to come down at me slowly. That's how you know. Your muscles will almost feel like, my father always had this neurological problem, this lower back problem, and it caused his right leg to give out randomly sometimes, where he would step on it and just, oh. And that's what I tell people. If you've ever had a muscle just give out on you, that's what your muscles should feel like as you approach failure. There's absolutely no way that you can not only lift the weight in perfect form, you can't even hold it either. So that's how I like to describe tensity. It is going to be very uncomfortable. When you get to the point where you are saying, wow, this is burning, this is uncomfortable, this sucks, I want to set it down, that is literally the exact moment the exercise begins. So what I teach my clients is, and what I'll do, I'll have them go train, I'll have them set their phone up against something and kind of film them in the gym, and we'll watch it together. And I'll say, hey, and I'll watch it with them, and I'll say, all right, see how you hit the wall here and you just sat right down? Okay, now for the next workout, I want you to get to that point where you change direction. It got really tough. And tell yourself, this is where the exercise begins, and I have 2 or 3 more reps in there. So now you've changed your whole perspective on what the exercise set is supposed to represent. And simple adjustments like that take them to an intensity level that they never felt before. So that's kind of how I like to look at it. But again, it takes time and it takes exposure and it takes experience to really understand, what these exercise sets should feel like. And for a lot of people who haven't been coached or taught this, more volume probably does yield them better results because they're not going into each exercise set with that intent. The intent of using this exercise, using the weight to punish my muscles. That's what I tell my clients. We're using this exercise to punish your muscles. Punish them as much as you can. Because as soon as the exercise ends, all the discomfort's going away anyway. Punish them. This has never been explained to a lot of people, and that's why they probably yield better results with more volume.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and I love some of those coaching points and techniques, and I've definitely used similar explanations for people before as well. And I think it's so cool, and you probably experienced this as a trainer over the years too, but when it finally clicks for people, right? When they've stopped their entire life, or if they've never trained before, but especially if they have, and they thought that they worked hard, and they get to the point where it's like, oh, okay, that's when I'm done, right? I try it. It doesn't move right away like I thought it was going to. I'm done. It's like, no. Do that next one. Oh, shit, I got it, right? Okay, now try the next one. Oh, shit, I got they start to realize how much they were actually leaving on the table. And just to see that switch flip in real time, like that never gets old for me, for sure. What are your thoughts on are there times when training to failure might not be necessary? And then obviously there's a lot of research that seems to be coming out now. We touched on it a little bit, saying that leaving a couple reps in the tank is okay, right? And a lot of times this is with trained and experienced lifters. And I think the caveat there would be that, well, these people know what they're doing, right? So they actually know how to push close to failure. And that's the biggest asterisk that you have to have is to give somebody who's untrained, yeah, just stop a couple reps shy is probably not the best advice if they want to maximize their outcomes. But what are some of your thoughts on times when it might be inappropriate potentially to train to failure? And then some of the research that's come out that's saying that maybe training to failure isn't actually necessary for optimizing gains.
That's under the assumption that you need multiple sets. So the problem I see is that no, failure is not necessary if you're using multiple sets. What failure does is recruit motor units more efficiently. The point of training to failure, in my opinion, is to not have to do multiple sets to get that level of motor unit recruitment or past that threshold that you need. So in these studies, the individuals are doing multiple sets. Have they compared one set of sufficient duration to real muscle failure versus multiple sets with reps and reserves? The answer is no. Now, if they had compared those two things, the conversation would be a little different. So obviously, if you have an individual doing, 2 reps in reserve or 3 reps in reserve, 3 sets, another individual doing 3 sets to failure, you've already, like I said, turned on those mechanosensors, those cost mirrors. You've turned them on in all the available motor units already. I've got my light on behind me. I can't turn it on anymore. I've already turned it on. So when we recruit those high threshold motor units with that 1 set to failure, boop, we turn it on. Second set, third set. You can't turn it on anymore. Basically, what multiple sets are doing is this. First set, reps in reserve. Second set, reps in reserve. Third set, reps in reserve. They're slowly getting to those higher order motor units with multiple sets. But the point of using, a set to failure is to just turn them on right away rather than slowly work your way up to them. It's efficient. So I wish they would do a study where they compared, performing a set, the way I do or the way you do to the way these advanced trainees do with reps in reserve. And I think it would show that the outcome's exactly the same. Because what they found, right, with the failure set and the reps in reserve set, that the improvement in muscle size was very similar, correct? And then
almost always.
Their conclusion was, well, you may not need to train to failure. Well, no shit. The point of training to failure is to not have to do that many sets, you moron. It's very bizarre how they just don't get it. And I've noticed a lot of exercise scientists and a lot of exercise researchers. I have some people who've joined my coaching with masters in exercise science, and many people with bachelor's degrees in exercise science, they were never taught Henneman's size principle. I don't know why. I'm under the impression the curriculum might change between universities, so it's not a standardized curriculum. People at McMaster might be learning something different than University of Tampa. But if you're going to do exercise research, I think you need to understand Henneman's size principle, right? And it's just it seems that, not to knock exercise scientists, but I'm always skeptical of the type of people who become exercise scientists. To me, they're not real scientists. They're kind of just, gym bros or jocks that liked exercise so much they wanted to get a PhD in it. But they kind of just, what job do you get with a PhD in exercise science other than trainer? So it's you're not, with exercise science, you're not attracting the cream of the crop scientists. You're attracting gym bros who just like to work out. And I think this is where the really low, the reason for the really low quality research is coming from. Because it doesn't take a genius to explain what I explained 2.5 minutes ago. It takes very common sense. So when it comes to that debate, well, should you train to failure? Should you not train to failure? Okay. If you want to save time, train to failure. If you want to spend more time in the gym, don't. At the same time, I don't give a shit. As long, and also there might be some people, there's physiological differences between people's ability to recruit motor units too. The pro bodybuilder probably recruits motor units ridiculously easily. Meanwhile, the hard gainer probably doesn't. The hard gainer probably needs to train really, really hard to see any muscle growth. Meanwhile, the bodybuilder can just kind of move stuff around. So there's physiological differences too. So a lot of individuals, the common debate is, well, this guy doesn't train to failure and he's big. It's like, so what? His ability to recruit motor units is far better than most people, So there's a lot of moving parts to that question, but we'd be having a different conversation if they did a study. Maybe Luke Carlson and Fisher and Steele, and maybe Wayne Westcott, maybe they'll do the study where they compare, a true set to muscle failure and reps in reserve. And I would bet my soul that the improvement in muscle growth would be identical.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
train to failure to save time.
I would tend to agree with you there. And I think, you kind of, again, nailed it with the idea that, like, I have a lot of respect for people in the exercise science field because I know a lot of them personally at that academic level. But let's be honest, right? It is dudes who like the gym, right? And it seems a lot of time like the research is justifying being able to train as much as possible. Like it's almost like the priorities are completely flipped in the field of where the average person would like to see as much gains as possible in the least amount of time. It seems like a lot of times the studies that are coming out are justifying how do we train more? Okay, you want to do 20 sets? Well, you've got to go to 3 RIR because if you train to failure, bro, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to hurt your gains and your recovery. It's like, well, yeah, no shit, because you shouldn't be doing 20 sets to failure. But I think there's, yeah, go ahead.
It's like fat people. It's like obese people doing research that suggests you should include more sugar in your diet.
Yeah.
It's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
It's something that they like to do, they enjoy doing. And here's the other thing, too. I mean, you're not making any money off of exercise science. You're not making money off of telling people to do 6 or 8 reps. So it's just like a field where I feel like we don't need research. Like, why are we doing this? They're not getting great fun. What's the point? The point should be, the literal point of exercise research should be to save people time and to save their joints, not to justify going more. So the whole exercise research field as a whole just doesn't seem to make any sense. You can't create a drug off it. You might be able to create some kind of apparatus that'll be popular for 6 months and then replaced by something else with new commercial interests. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think you're right. It's just, confirmation bias of people who kind of want to justify spending 5-6 days a week in the gym, but that's not helping anybody. Your research is supposed to help people. Telling people to do, 3 more sets or 2 less sets, how is that helping anybody? Because we all know your genetics are going to dictate how you look in the end anyway. I just don't understand the field. And I'm at the point now where I almost don't even like reading the research. I read a meta-analysis today that said slow repetition cadences were worse for strength than fast repetition cadences. I go, oh boy, let's look at this. It's a meta-analysis. It was published in the journal of, I have it up here. It was published in the NSCA's journal. Who is the NSCA? Oh, I don't know. The people who make the CSCS certification that tell athletes to lift explosively. So we got people creating and publishing research to support the courses they sell. It's like the whole thing is complete utter fraud. And it's not helping anybody. So I don't even, and sure enough, I actually look at each individual study. Almost none of them, the vast majority, I'm saying 95% of the studies included in their meta-analysis showed, and I quote, no significant difference between slow repetition and fast repetition when it came to muscle strength. Most of them. What's their conclusion? Well, slow repetitions aren't good for muscle strength. Dude, it drives me crazy. It bothers me. Genuinely.
Yeah, and it's interesting too though, because if you know anything about the history of the ACSM and the NSCA and stuff as well, at least if I was to try to defend them, which I think it's indefensible a lot of the stuff that they do, but at least they're actually conducting research now. Where if you look at the stuff in the 80s and 90s, they would literally just cite something that was like three people in a study and just build the entire foundation off of there, and then every other updated manual would reference another study which referenced the, like it was the ultimate
Oh yeah.
Ponzi scheme of
Yep.
exercise science research. So at least in their defense, Jay, they're attempting to be a little more subliminal with their with their bullshit
I
messaging
mean,
these days.
it literally says Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research is where this was published. And then under the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, it says NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association. And I'm like, oh, really? So they're creating research to support. It's like people who create a product or a supplement and then create this faulty research to support that their product or supplement is so amazing. It's no different. And I think it's disingenuous and I think it's fraud. Because if you're going to tell athletes to move explosively, thereby risking injury, you better have a effing mountain of literature that is worth the trade off of destroying your joints. And not only do they not have a mountain of literature for this, they have none. And this is the problem. So the problem is, oh, if it's good for sports performance, blah, 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 blah. The problem is you could literally be ending somebody's career, ending their dream, and screwing up their long term health by this bullshit you promote with no evidence behind it. That's what irritates the hell out of me. It's not the fact that it's not effective, it's the fact that you're hurting people.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. And I mean, I see this obviously all the time. I actually, I got my master's in strength and conditioning, and I see this all the time with SNC coaches, particularly at the high school level, who are getting information passed down from the college level, who are getting information passed down from the professional level. And
Mm-hmm.
like you and I both know, obviously, Mark Asanovich and some other really high level strength coaches who've practiced really evidence based, I would say, like extremely safe approaches to exercise over the years. And Mark, I don't think I had him on my previous podcast, and in his 20 plus years he never had a sports related injury in his facility, right?
Right.
God, do you see so many injuries these days in high school athletics that have nothing to do with the actual sport, and it is infuriating because it's these kids are so invested. And there's another argument to be had here too about overtraining just in general, and kids doing sports year round, and all of the investment that parents are making into these just god awful programs with the justification that they're trying to serve their kids' best interests. But yeah, it's sad, and it's scary, and it is infuriating to see some of the things that they're having kids who, not only are they moving too fast, not only are they risking injury, but they also haven't developed yet. So you're having 12, 13, 14-year-old kids that haven't even hit puberty, that still have bones that are malleable, that still have joints that are malleable, that are doing Olympic explosive weightlifting. It's like, what the fuck are we doing here? And they get hurt and nobody hears about it, and it doesn't become national news. And I can't even imagine the amount of like the nameless amount of careers that have been lost over the last 10, 15 years in the justification of you got to train fast to be fast. And with that in mind, I'd love to dive into this last argument here just about sports specific training, because like I mentioned earlier, I mean, you've been going off on some of these PTs and some of this other functional training stuff that we've seen. I love watching your videos about motor learning and just talking about the principles of motor learning in general. But why don't you give our listeners just a big picture overview of why things like balance training, why things like functional training that we hear thrown around all the time, specifically for athletes. And I see this all the time with parents who bring their kids in that go, oh, but shouldn't we be doing balance? Shouldn't we be doing explosive skills training? And it's like, dear God, no, practice your sport and strength train safely. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
So it's my this topic just drives me insane because it's like It's so obvious once it's explained to you. If balance, first of all, it has been documented by motor learning research since the 1970s. I have a book by Bryant J. Craddy sitting on my desk. Okay, this book was published in 1973. We've known this for so long that balance is a specific non-transferable skill. Okay? Don't believe me? Take a professional snowboarder, toss him on a surfboard. Case closed. Like it's so obvious. Skill transfer is so specific that my favorite example is, we all have a keyboard that we're used to. All right, this is an iMac keyboard. I've been using this keyboard for like 4 years. If for some reason this keyboard dies, which it does occasionally, I have a fat, cheap $15 keyboard that I plug into my iMac, and I'm making typos all over the place. Why? It's the same as exact activity. The keys are in the same exact place. It's a skill that I've been doing since I was 8. Yet I cannot transfer the skill of typing on this keyboard to another keyboard because of extremely small differences in key spacing, key height, keyboard height, things like that. So if you can't transfer the same activity of typing between keyboards, how? Please tell me how. Balancing on a fucking Bosu ball is going to make you better at balancing on a football field, which is a stable surface. The truth is it's not, okay? And and not only this, again, if you're going to have people balancing, and I saw the NFL wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, balancing on one foot and throwing a medicine ball up and catching it. This guy is very likely supporting his entire extended family with his career. And you are risking the livelihood of him and his extended family by having him do this ridiculous shit that there's no evidence behind. All right, there is a paper written by, I've got it pulled up.
Before you jump into that, Jay, did you see Quarterback, the Netflix show Quarterback?
No, and the reason I haven't watched it is because Patrick Mahomes' voice bothers me.
Kermit the Frog, yeah. So he,
I like him. He's a good guy. I like him as a person. His voice,
yeah, it's a great show. It was really well done. But I just remember when it first came out, I watched it right away, and I was texting with a few colleagues afterwards. There's a point in the show, you talk about CeeDee Lamb, talk about a lot of money and supporting a lot of people. Patrick Mahomes had just signed his like $400 million contract extension, and his trainer that's been training him since he was 15 has him put like a 185-pound barbell on his back, on his neck, and start doing jumping and like box jumps, split lunge box jumps. And I'm watching this like, how the fuck is his insurance agent signing off on this? Because all it takes is one wrong move. I mean, you screw up Patrick Mahomes' career, and that's billions of dollars for the Kansas. Forget his contract. Like the amount of money that dude brings into the city of Kansas City. I was just watching it going like, how do people let high-level athletes get away with this stuff? Because I'm sure you've seen it all the time. CeeDee Lamb's just one of many examples of NFL football players who do just ridiculous shit. I see it all the time with running backs where it's like, this just proves that you're a freak athlete. This has nothing to do with the actual transferability of the skill. But please talk about that.
Yeah, these are demonstrations of athletic ability. So when you do these with high-level athletes, it gives people who don't know any better. Not that they're dumb, they just simply don't know any better. Because I was like this before. I bought a program by Adam Archuleta. Adam Archuleta was the number one. He was the highest drafted, highest paid strong safety. He was in like 2001. He ran like a 4.35 40. He had a 39-inch vertical jump. He bench pressed 225 35 times. He was a fucking freak. 6 foot, 210. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? I bought his DVD. He's jumping off of boxes, doing all this crazy shit, and I did it. Okay? We just didn't know any better. But the thing is, you take a high-level athlete like this, and they're able to do this because they're athletes, It's no different than doing like a high level skill in any other. It's no different. CD Lamb balancing on a Bosu ball with 1 foot, throwing a medicine ball, is no different than juggling shaker bottles on a unicycle. It's not. But we call one exercise and we call one a fucking circus act, which is, they're both circus acts. But this gives people who don't know any better the impression that they should be doing something like that because their idol is doing it. And somebody in the comments said, because with the CD Lamb one, I said I always use just like no tone, provide facts, guys, check us out, whatever. He goes, well, he must be doing something right. He had 1,700 reception yards. And I said, yeah, he caught the football well. And then the response was, oh, well, it's not all about just catching the football. Well, no shit, you idiot. Obviously, but there's a paper. Let's see, James Fisher, James Steele, Stuart Brucelow, and Dave Smith, 2011, and they looked at some of the research on core stability on stable surfaces. And one paragraph here says, let's see. As stated in the preceding section, balance is a non-transferable skill, cited. And as suggested by Willardson, and I believe that was 2004, and I believe it was a strength and conditioning text, quote, performing resistance exercise on an unstable equipment will make an individual more proficient at performing resistance exercise on unstable equipment, but may not enhance the performance of sports skills. So if the evidence is there, and they cited all the evidence that balance is a non-transferable skill, why is it that multi-billion-dollar investments, aka athletes, do not have one person around them that knows this? And it comes down to this fraudulent curriculum. ACSM, NSCA, they make millions of dollars off certifications, continuing education, and they have literally, in many cases, probably destroyed an invisible graveyard of athletes with this nonsense. So, it'd be one thing if it only just wasn't effective. You're wasting a little bit of time. But man, if CD Lamb rolls his ankle on a Bosu ball, the Dallas Cowboys got a really big fucking problem. So it just, most of it is, obviously we don't want people getting hurt. It's just the amount of people who don't understand something so basic is frightening. And these are people with education in this subject.
Yeah.
I mean, why do you think they're not taught this? I mean, you have a master's in strength and conditioning. They didn't teach you any of this?
I think, you learn about some of the motor learning principles, but there's so much cognitive dissonance, especially at the higher levels, of what high level athletes are able to do. And I think that's lost on the average person, right? Because I'm sure at some point in your career, you've interacted with like a really, really high level athlete, like Olympic caliber, NFL caliber. And if you've ever worked with athletes like that, and you can talk to guys like Mark, anybody else that's been in that realm before, it doesn't matter what the skill is. Like, these guys are just wired differently. They are not human beings in the sense that we think of typical human beings, where there's a learning curve for stuff. So you ask CD Lamb to get on a Bosu ball and juggle, and he's probably going to do it better than anybody who's ever done it before, simply because he's wired that way. And, I watched the Tom Brady roast the other day, and there was a few jokes about whatever his name is, Guerrera, like his trainer. But I think there's so much cognitive dissonance for high level athletes. When you get to that point, you almost have to believe in yourself and whatever you've done to get you there, right? You don't want to change anything. That's why Michael Jordan wore his same, boxers or his shorts or whatever that he wore at North Carolina for forever. You get very stuck in your ways and just reliant on what got you to that point. And for Patrick Mahomes, that's this guy he's been working with since he was 15. He gives him credit for all his, wonderful athletic accomplishments, but he could switch trainers tomorrow and he'd still be Patrick Mahomes. Tom Brady could stop doing all that stupid band shit, TB12, come back next year and still win another Super Bowl, right? Like, these guys are just not mere mortals. And I think that's lost on average humans. And they just think, oh, it must be because they did A and B that they got to C. But the reality is, I always use this example of LeBron James. Like LeBron James, if he'd had never played basketball until his senior year of high school, he still would have been a lottery pick. Now, he might not have been the first overall pick, but if he just picked up a basketball for the first time at 18 and started playing, like there's no way he's not scoring 20 points a game. And at the very least, getting a full ride scholarship to a college, right? Because he's a fucking freak. And I think unless you've seen these people and interacted with them, it just seems like, no, they're just like you and me. It's like, no, they're not. They are a different species. Whether it's Adam Archuleta or whether it's LeBron James, it's like you can't compare yourself. And the other example I always give is don't do what works for LeBron James. Do what works for LeBron James' grandma, right? Like simplify it down to the lowest common denominator. And I'm sure she's a freak too, but the lowest common denominator instead of the highest, most unattainable athlete humanly imaginable. Anything else from a functional training perspective before we sort of wrap this up here, Jay?
Yeah, it's just, I understand. And Doug McGuff said something along the lines of this before. The human brain did not evolve for logic. It evolved for survival. We evolved to recognize patterns because, I'll tell you what, sitting at this desk, coaching, creating content, I don't do a physical job, but I do a very mental job. And by 5 p.m., I have a migraine because of the amount of mental energy that I expend. Now, the point of saying that is that we evolved in a way to conserve energy by not having to expend a lot of mental energy, by recognizing patterns. Critical thinking and logic, which is something you and I do all day, every day, expends a lot of mental energy. So it's not people's fault. It's just how they are wired and how they are designed to think. So I don't blame people for thinking this way. I don't ridicule them for thinking this way. But what I would like to do is provide the correct information, because there might be somebody who possesses some good critical thinking skills, which, is probably, has a genetic inheritance, just like athletic ability, that stumbles across this like I did, like you did, and then they improve their life. That is my goal, is to, get this information out there for an individual who can use it, who will use it, and will improve their life. And for the athletes who want to do all kinds of that crazy nonsense, go for it. Good luck. But if some chance you want to extend your playing career and focus more of your energy on honing in your skills, hire me.
Yeah, with that in mind, why don't you tell us a little bit about, take a second to sort of plug your program and your community that you built over the last few years. I think you're a must follow on Instagram. So for anybody that's not following you, is it just at Jay Vincent or is it Jay Vincent Fitness?
It's _J_Vincent.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So definitely follow on Instagram. I know you've got a YouTube as well. Talk to us a little bit about your community, what your specialty is, and how you help people that have maybe sort of hit their plateau, or skinny guys especially. How do you help them pack on muscle? How can people learn more about what you offer and maybe even work with you?
Yeah, so if people have never tried high intensity training, I created a video course called the Golden Era System. It's a series of a bunch of videos that teaches you these principles in very basic, easy to understand and comprehend ways, so you can learn the principles fast and get to working out. Okay. Obviously, we have a lot of books: Dr. Ellington Darden, Drew Bay, Doug McGuff. But my generation, our generation, they want, show me what to do, tell me what to do, let me go do it. I created the Golden Era System for that. Okay. So if you have never tried high intensity training, you want to learn it and apply it, boom, go there. If you want to optimize your results, as you and I both know, you're going to want a coach to teach you how to push to that next level of more unit recruitment, a coach to teach you how to design and adjust your training, and of course, your diet. And a lot of the times too, as you know, as a trainer, people tend to get better results when they are held accountable. All right. So I also offer coaching for that reason, where I teach you. We watch your training videos together. I set you up with a diet. We adjust the diet. In most of the community that I am working on lately, and it just kind of happened organically, is putting mass on skinny guys. The reason I've kind of started to focus on that is because I've seen almost instant ability to put on muscle when I start coaching a thinner individual. I've had thinner guys put on 5 to 10 pounds in just 4 weeks. That's 8 workouts. And this all comes down to simply dialing in their ability to push their body hard. And of course, the correct diet. So a lot of my content is focused on putting on muscle. Obviously, if it comes to losing a lot of weight, I have tons of people doing that as well with diet adjustment. But a lot of my content is focused on really kind of debunking a lot of the stuff that we were debunking. I don't do it in a way where it's like, Greg Doucette, where I'm, just creating drama and saying, they said this and they said that. No, no, no. What I like to do is identify something and explain with physiological facts and easy to follow and understand reasoning why it's incorrect. And I think by doing this, it kind of helps people learn effective exercise. So I spend a lot of time in my content kind of debunking this kind of stuff, and at the same time teaching the proper principles to help people learn and understand exercise better. So yeah, my niche, really putting mass on thinner guys. If you're a hard gainer, my answer is no, you're not. You just don't know how to train correctly, and that's what I show you.
And if they're interested in learning more or finding out more about your system, what's the best way for people to contact you or potentially reach out?
They could reach out to me via direct message on Instagram _J_Vincent, or email me at jvincentfitness@gmail.com.
I love that. Jay, I really appreciate you coming on today. And just to quickly recap, I mean, there's so much just BS nonsense out there in the fitness industry. I think a great place for everyone who's interested in finding evidence-based, smart, practical ways to train is finding reputable practitioners that actually have experience that they can share. And you're one of the few voices under the umbrella of HIT, I would say, that actually has a decent following. I mean, Drew is great. There's some other great companies out there, but it's all tends to be very niche, and there's a lot of infighting, as we kind of talked about before. So I think just not majoring in the minors and really focusing on the big picture of how to actually get results is super important. And the reality is it's not complicated, right? We've already talked about this. It's work hard, workout brief, relatively infrequent, and then prioritize nutritious food and dietary habits, and you'll be well on your way to seeing really good results. So anything else to add before I let you go, Jay?
Yeah, guys, stop majoring in the minor. Stop focusing on how many grams of protein, how many sets, how many workouts, whether it's a MedX machine or a hammer strength machine. None of that stuff is going to make a difference in the long run. You want to find a training approach that is sustainable, because consistency is key. And I'm going to end it with this quote: people generally overestimate what can be accomplished with exercise in a month and drastically underestimate what can be accomplished by exercise in a year. So stay consistent, make sure it's sustainable, don't overdo it, and you will, over time, see tremendous changes in both your health and your physique.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for taking the time today, Jay. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon for more exercise bullshit. Thanks, everyone, for listening.